Joan Baez, once hailed as America's most beautiful voice, has lived a life full of remarkable highs and heartbreaking lows. Now 83 years old, the iconic folk singer, who once stood side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. in the fight for civil rights, finds herself in an unexpected and deeply painful chapter of her life. After a long battle with mental illness, Joan has bravely opened up about the unimaginable truth she carried for decades. She was sexually abused by her renowned father. The story of Joan Baez is not just one of musical greatness, but also one of profound personal struggle. Known for her relationship with Bob Dylan and Steve Jobs, Joan's public life was once full of glamour and admiration. Today, however, she lives alone, finding solace in the silence of a treehouse, where she has named one of the trees the Counselor, a tribute to the tree that listens better than her therapists ever did. She speaks to her plants more than to people, illustrating the crushing isolation that has gripped her in recent years. Baez's path to fame, however, began long before she ever sang a note. Her father, Albert Baez, was a brilliant physicist whose groundbreaking work on the X-ray microscope brought him recognition early in his career. Yet, it wasn't just his intellect that set him apart. It was his moral compass. During the Cold War, when many in his field eagerly accepted high-paying jobs in the defense industry, Albert Baez chose a different path. He turned down lucrative offers in favor of quieter, less profitable work with universities and UNESCO. In doing so, he upheld his conscience, a commitment to integrity that Joan would come to inherit. Growing up in such a household, Joan was keenly aware of the sacrifices her father made for his principles. "We would never have all the fine and useless things little girls want when they are growing up," she once reflected. "Instead, we would have a father with a clear conscience." This emphasis on integrity and social justice was instilled in Joan from an early age, and it would shape the way she viewed the world and her role in it. Joan's childhood was marked by frequent moves, but one place would leave an indelible mark on her soul: Baghdad. Her father's work setting up science programs at the university took the family to Iraq when Joan was just 10. The experience thrust her into a world of stark contrasts. She vividly recalls the shocking images she witnessed upon arriving: a beggar being beaten by police at the airport gate, people searching through trash for food, and children suffering in the streets. The brutality of the scene was stark and unforgettable. Joan's time in Baghdad opened her eyes to the harsh realities of the world, and she often recalled feeling a weight on her heart during those years. It was during this time that she read The Diary of Anne Frank, an experience that only deepened her awareness of human suffering. But the impact of those early years went beyond the external chaos she witnessed. It shaped her internal landscape as well. In the years that followed, as she returned to California, Joan became keenly aware of the injustices happening closer to home. Despite being born in New York, her Mexican heritage left her feeling like an outsider. She was often mocked at school, called a stupid Mexican by her peers. At the same time, she didn't fit in with the Mexican students either because she didn't speak Spanish. This sense of being caught between two worlds sharpened her sense of right and wrong, a keen awareness of discrimination that would later define her activism. "I was brown and wasn't accepted," Joan would later say, reflecting on those formative years. "But I knew the real issue was for the blacks." It was this understanding that fueled her decision to make difficult choices later in her life. One of her most courageous acts was refusing to perform for segregated white audiences in the South during the height of the civil rights movement. Instead, she chose to perform for black colleges, even though this decision put her career at risk. Around this time, another powerful force entered her life: the Quaker faith. When Joan was just 8 years old, her family became Quakers, a community known for its deep commitment to peace and justice. This spiritual foundation would continue to influence her throughout her life, guiding her as she navigated her complex and often tumultuous personal and professional journey. Joan Baez's life has been one of extraordinary highs. An artist who captured the hearts of millions, an activist who stood on the front lines of history, and a woman who has always followed her conscience, no matter the cost. But it has also been marked by painful lows, with the revelation of abuse by the very person she should have been able to trust most, the man who helped shape her worldview. Now, as Joan Baez reflects on her journey, we are reminded that the most captivating stories are not just about triumph, but also about the courage to face personal truths, to rebuild from brokenness, and to continue seeking solace even in the most unexpected places. The woman who once inspired us with her music now finds peace in quiet moments, listening to the trees, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit even after decades of pain. Joan Baez's values were shaped early on by the powerful conversations around her dinner table, where topics like war, peace, and moral responsibility were discussed with unwavering passion. At just 15 years old, a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. moved her to tears and solidified her commitment to social justice. Not long after, she made a quiet but bold stand against the Cold War by refusing to participate in an air raid drill at school. This act of defiance, though subtle, earned her a spot in the local newspaper and marked the beginning of her lifelong activism. In the summer of 1959, a momentous event occurred that would forever alter the course of Joan Baez's life. At the Newport Folk Festival, an 18-year-old unknown with no record deal and no fame walked barefoot onto the stage with a borrowed guitar. She sang just 2 songs alongside folk singer Bob Gibson, but those fleeting minutes left the audience in stunned silence. Her voice, pure and high, was unlike anything the crowd had ever heard. That night, in a sea of folk legends like Pete Seeger and Bo Diddley, it was Joan's name that buzzed through the airwaves. Record labels scrambled to sign her, and in an instant, she went from a mere hopeful to the talk of the town. That serendipitous moment in 1959 would go on to define her legacy, and even in her 80s, Joan returned to Newport, where it all began, cementing her enduring connection to the festival. By the age of 19, Joan recorded her debut album in a far cry from the glamour of the music industry's typical production spaces. She found herself in the shabby ballroom of New York's Manhattan Towers Hotel. The environment was anything but glamorous. She sat on a dirty rug with just 2 microphones and tried her best to avoid being distracted by the bingo games happening nearby. There was no high-end studio production, just her voice, her guitar, and an authenticity that would prove irresistible. Although it didn't chart immediately, Joan's album eventually reached number 15, where it stayed for almost 3 years. What set Joan apart, however, was not the sales figures, but the choice she made to sign with Vanguard Records, a small label that promised her the artistic freedom to create without constraints. That raw and honest album would later be hailed by the Library of Congress as one of the most significant American recordings ever made. Before hitting the big stages and recording albums, Joan spent time honing her craft at Club 47 in Cambridge near Harvard. The club was modest, and when she first performed there, the crowd was sparse and the nerves were overwhelming. Yet there was something undeniable about Joan. Her presence, her mystery, her unique voice, whatever it was, it captivated audiences. As word spread, the club's once empty rooms quickly became packed, with lines forming down the street to catch a glimpse of the barefoot singer. From making $10 a night to $25, Joan's rise in the folk scene was rapid, and Club 47 became her proving ground, a space where she could refine her voice and performance, and where her connection with the audience grew deeper by the night. It was at Newport that the iconic image of Joan Baez performing barefoot was born. What began as a simple quirk, singing without shoes, became a symbol of Joan's defiance against the polished, artificial side of the music industry. Her bare feet came to represent her purity, her unfiltered approach to both music and life. Fans treated her like a saint, But Joan was quick to dismiss that image. She once wrote, "I am not a saint. I am a noise." The pressure to maintain a perfect persona, however, became a burden as the years wore on. Yet, in her 80s, Joan found peace in this rebellion. She danced barefoot in Paris, not for the applause of the crowd, but simply for herself, finally free to be exactly who she wanted to be. Joan Baez's journey is one of transformation, not just in her music, but in her personal liberation. The raw, unfiltered authenticity that captivated audiences early in her career still resonates today, as she continues to embrace the freedom that comes with shedding expectations and living fully as herself. From the Newport Folk Festival to her quiet moments in Paris, Joan's story is a testament to the power of remaining true to oneself, no matter the cost. In 1961, the trajectory of Joan Baez's life took another pivotal turn when she walked into a Greenwich Village club and encountered a scruffy, unknown young man named Bob Dylan. At the time, Joan was already a household name, while Dylan was still a raw, emerging talent. But the moment Joan heard him perform Song to Woody, something profound shifted within her. His voice, rough and untamed, carried a weight of emotion that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She later admitted that hearing it made her fall apart inside. It was that beautiful. This initial encounter sparked a deeper connection, especially after hearing him sing "With God on Our Side" at a party. Joan came to realize that Dylan was not just another talented songwriter. He was a revolutionary voice, a force of nature. Over the following years, Joan Baez used her considerable fame to help Dylan rise into the star he would become. In 1963, she invited him to perform with her at the Newport Folk Festival, a platform that would launch his career to new heights. The audience wasn't immediately receptive to Dylan's raw style, but Joan, unwavering in her belief in his talent, continued to support him. She took him on tour, giving him stage time and introducing his music to large audiences. In fact, at one concert in Queens, Joan dedicated more than half of her set to singing Dylan songs, telling her fans, "Bobby Dylan says what a lot of people my age feel but cannot say." When the two of them performed at the historic March on Washington, on the same day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, it was clear that Dylan had transcended his role as a mere folk singer. With Joan's help, he had become a voice of the civil rights movement. But as the 1960s unfolded, fame and success began to create distance between them. By 1965, Dylan had outgrown their professional partnership, and though he invited Joan to join him on his UK tour, he ultimately left her off the stage. Confused and heartbroken, Joan found herself walking the halls backstage, grappling with the sting of being excluded. It was not long before Dylan shocked the world and Joan by marrying Sarah, a woman who was pregnant with his child. In the years that followed, Joan reflected on the pain of that moment, admitting, "Dylan broke my heart. I was just stoned on that talent." For Dylan, the decision was clear. Sarah would do what he wanted, while Joan, with her independent spirit, would not. He wanted control, not a partner. Despite the personal heartache, Joan's artistic integrity remained intact. In 1968, she recorded an entire album of Dylan's songs, titled "Any Day Now." To choose the tracks, she spread his sheet music across the floor, closed her eyes, and selected songs at random. The result was breathtaking. Critics hailed her haunting rendition of "Tears of Rage," one of the tracks Dylan had never even recorded. Joan's voice, rich with emotion, brought new life to his words, and the album became a stunning testament to her artistry and resilience. She even designed the album's cover art herself, making "Any Day Now" not just a collection of songs, but a deeply personal reflection of everything she and Dylan had shared and ultimately lost. In the summer of 1963, at the tender age of 22, Joan Baez stood before a massive crowd at the March on Washington and sang "We Shall Overcome," just moments before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his now iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. Joan had already experienced the sting of racism firsthand. With a Mexican father and a Scottish mother, her family faced prejudice, an experience that fueled her lifelong commitment to social justice. Just 4 years earlier, Joan had been discovered at the Newport Folk Festival, but now her voice was no longer just a whisper in the folk scene. It was a clarion call for justice, echoing across the National Mall. Her rendition of "We Shall Overcome" would become forever tied to the civil rights movement and to her name, marking Joan Baez as not only a musical icon, but a fearless advocate for equality. The March on Washington in 1963, which drew around 250,000 people, overwhelmingly Black Americans, was a defining moment in the civil rights movement, and Joan Baez's voice was indelibly linked to that historic day. As she stood there singing "We Shall Overcome" before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech, Joan became more than just a performer. She became a symbol of the power of music to stir hearts and shift the course of history. Her song resonated across the National Mall, alongside the fervent calls for justice, embodying the spirit of change sweeping through the country. That very voice played a crucial role in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, making Joan Baez a pivotal figure in the fight for racial equality. 2 years later, in March 1965, Joan's activism continued with her participation in the Selma to Montgomery marches. These marches followed the brutal violence of Bloody Sunday, when peaceful protesters were attacked by law enforcement on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Joan was there, walking the 54 miles alongside thousands of other activists, lending her presence to a cause far greater than any one individual. Images from the march show her standing among the protesters, listening and engaging with the crowd. The night before the final rally at the Alabama State Capitol, Joan performed at Stars for Freedom, a concert held alongside legends like Nina Simone, Tony Bennett, and Harry Belafonte. But this wasn't just a performance, it was a clarion call for change. That year, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, a monumental step in dismantling the institutionalized barriers that had long disenfranchised Black Americans. Joan's commitment to justice was not confined to marches and speeches. She refused to perform at venues that upheld segregation, particularly in the South, where many colleges still barred Black students from attending. Her refusal to perform at such places was a bold and often risky stance, but it was one she took willingly. Joan chose instead to perform at historically Black colleges and universities, standing in solidarity with the students and communities who had long been oppressed. During a performance at Miles College in Alabama, she arrived just as the infamous police chief Bull Connor was overseeing mass arrests in nearby Birmingham. She stayed at one of the only motels in the area that allowed both Black and white guests, where she joined Martin Luther King Jr. and his team. Joan didn't just speak of justice, she embodied it. In 1964, Joan took another bold step that garnered national attention. She refused to pay 60% of her income taxes, citing that the funds were being used to support the Vietnam War. Her defiance was one of the earliest acts of tax resistance during the conflict, inspiring others to follow suit. While it didn't land her in jail, it solidified her as a fierce and unyielding voice against war. By 1967, Joan was arrested twice for blocking the entrance to a military center in Oakland, California, and on both occasions, her mother was by her side. The two women spent more than a month in jail, their act of civil disobedience a resounding statement against the war. This became a powerful form of peaceful protest, sparking a broader movement that saw thousands refusing to pay taxes that funded the military and even withholding their phone bills, knowing that those taxes supported the war effort. In December 1972, Joan did something that few would dare. She went into the heart of the war zone. Along with a group of peace activists, she traveled to North Vietnam with the intent of delivering Christmas letters to American prisoners of war and raising concerns about human rights. But while they were there, the U.S. escalated its bombing campaign over Hanoi. For 11 days, Joan and her group took shelter in a hotel bunker as bombs rained down above them. Joan's courage to be on the front lines of such a dangerous conflict and her determination to use her voice and her platform for peace further solidified her legacy as an artist who stood unwaveringly for justice, even at great personal risk. Her harrowing experience in Vietnam would become another chapter in her tireless fight for global peace and human dignity. Joan Baez's 1972 visit to Vietnam drastically reshaped her view on life as she witnessed the horrors of bombing in Hanoi. This encounter forced her to confront her mortality and solidified her commitment to nonviolence and peace. Prior to this, in 1965, Baez had founded the Institute for the Study of Nonviolence in Carmel Valley, California, using her music earnings, alongside her mentor, Ira Sandpearl. Despite local resistance, fearing unrest from hippies, she was determined and relaunched the Institute in December of that year, teaching peaceful protest organization and nonviolent philosophies. Baez's activist network grew, most notably with actress Jane Fonda, whose shared ideals eventually diverged after their Vietnam experiences. Their rift intensified in 1979 when Baez criticized the Vietnamese government for human rights abuses, while Fonda defended it. In 1991, Baez confronted deep personal trauma by revealing in a letter to her parents that her father had sexually abused her as a child, an allegation he denied. This painful acknowledgement, spurred by family therapy sessions, highlighted her ongoing emotional struggle with the past, encapsulated in her reflection that even uncertain memories could leave profound scars. Joan Baez lived with the burden of her father's painful revelation, but found the strength to forgive him before his death in 2007. In a moving moment, she sang to him in his wheelchair, their silence reflecting their complicated relationship. Beneath her poised public persona lay a woman grappling with profound emotional struggles, living with dissociative identity disorder, DID, since childhood. This disorder manifested as fragmented identities, including one she called Diamond Joan, along with other personas tied to stories and voices not her own. Joan battled severe anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and insomnia, often overshadowing moments of joy. Her mental health struggles strained her relationship with her son, Gabriel, leading her to feeling absent at times. The late 1970s and early 1980s were tumultuous for her, marked by a crisis of purpose following the Vietnam War. She turned to pills as a coping mechanism, but their ban by President Carter forced her to quit. Her healing journey began at 16, when therapy revealed deep emotional issues. Eventually, hypnosis sessions in her 50s helped her confront past traumas, leading to a newfound peace and clarity about her life. After her rocky romance with Bob Dylan concluded, Joan Baez made a daring artistic shift. In January 1970, she launched One Day at a Time, an album that caught both fans and critics off guard. Recorded at Bradley's Barn, a country music studio in Tennessee, the album represented Joan's foray into the country genre, marking a stark departure from her folk heritage. This transition was not purely personal. It bore significant political implications. While folk music was often linked to left-wing rebellious movements, country music was typically associated with conservative values. By embracing country, Joan ventured into a realm few artists had the courage to explore. The album showcased a diverse array of songs, including covers of the Rolling Stones and Willie Nelson, alongside protest anthems such as Pete Seeger's Carry It On and the labor movement classic Joe Hill. Joan Baez's bold move into country music not only redefined her artistic identity, but also challenged the prevailing political connotations of the genres, setting the stage for future artists to explore new musical landscapes without fear of judgment. Joan Baez's transition to country music was intertwined with her personal life, particularly her marriage to David Harris, a passionate anti-Vietnam War activist who was imprisoned for his beliefs. While he was incarcerated, she recorded an album reflective of a country style she had previously explored for him, demonstrating her commitment to challenging societal norms through music. This period marked a significant evolution in Baez's career as she began sharing her original songs, with Sweet Sir Galahad, dedicated to her sister, and A Song for David, honoring her husband. Previously, between 1966 and 1968, Baez ventured into classical music, collaborating with composer Peter Schick and releasing distinctive albums that reimagined various artists' works and featured poetry from literary icons, thus diverging from the electrifying trends of the late 60s. In 1974, Baez released Gracia Salvida, an album almost entirely in Spanish that paid tribute to the silenced Chilean folk singer Victor Jara. This politically charged work showcased her emotional performance, resonating deeply in Latin America. A pivotal moment came when Bob Dylan's phone call inspired Baez to write Diamonds and Rust, a poignant reflection on their past, which became a hit and solidified her artistic legacy. In 1982, Joan Baez, then 41, met 27-year-old Steve Jobs through her sister Mimi, who worked in a charity providing computers for prisons. Drawn to Baez's intellect and humor, Jobs fell for her, leading to a serious 3-year romance. Although he contemplated marriage, he hesitated, uncertain about the future, yet their relationship significantly impacted them both. Close friends revealed that Jobs desired a family, but Baez, with a teenage son, made this difficult. A notable incident occurred at a Ralph Lauren store when Jobs suggested Baez buy a dress, but she declined due to cost, which left a lasting impression on her. After their breakup in 1985, they remained connected, with Baez later thanking him in her memoir for inspiring her to use a word processor, a gift he had left in her kitchen. Baez's life also featured intriguing relationships, including a 2-year romance in the early 1960s with a woman named Kim, which she openly discussed in interviews, and her documentary, I Am a Noise. This relationship offered her a calming perspective on love. In her later years, Baez found peace in nature, particularly in trees. She established a connection with her favorite tree, the counselor, and built a treehouse, preferring its comfort over traditional therapy, even after an accident while climbing down. In her 80s, Joan Baez found joy in movement, dancing barefoot each morning to Gypsy King's music, which she credited with uplifting her mood. At 84, she surprised audiences with an unforgettable interpretive dance to a Cypress Hill song on live television, showcasing her belief that dancing signifies joy, rebellion, and vitality. At 77, she embraced painting as a new creative outlet, holding her first solo art show in 2017 featuring portraits of activists. By 2021, she exhibited works including figures like Kamala Harris and Dr. Anthony Fauci, with her painting Trust gaining online popularity. Baez used her artistry to continue advocating for justice in a different form. In 2023, she released the documentary Joan Baez, I Am a Noise, which candidly addressed her childhood trauma, mental health challenges, and dissociative identity disorder diagnosis, revealing her struggles amid a public persona of fearlessness. In 2024, she published her first poetry collection, When You See My Mother, Ask Her to Dance, filled with deeply personal themes related to her therapy in the 90s. encompassing childhood, healing, and memory. One poem respectfully reflected on her past with Bob Dylan, encapsulating their shared history.